our guest this morning, you usually recall that we try to start Viewpoint with a program or two, kudo or so, regarding something going on in the community and so forth. And Judith K., it occurred to me, as I sat down this morning thinking about kudos, it might be just as appropriate to put out kudos to the Gillette Ransoms and the Tommy Martins and the Leonard Kuzmarks in our community who, in small villages, kind of help make things go and enhance the value and the fun of living in small communities. So I think we'll just let it stand at that. We'll make our kudo to our guest this morning and her cohorts in these small communities. How about that? Would that work?
I think that's a very good one. And
good. I came up with something to suit you.
Everything you do suits me. You're a suiting type guy. But we do have a very good guest this morning. Gillette has been with us before, and she takes care of all the historical things on the south end of the county. She really does. Were you always, even as a kid in school, interested in history, Gillette?
I think my biggest aha moment where history was concerned was when I was taking care of my grandfather, Dr. Selim MacArthur, in his final years. And he got me started being interested about the Civil War. And I thought, for a teenage girl with, I don't know, not that much going on about history in my brain at that point, that was quite a challenge. And he convinced me to read the 20th Maine, which was about Chamberlain.
Oh.
And that started such an appreciation for not just dates and places, but actually the lives of the people that were involved. And so I became a lot more interested about reading actual diaries and really thinking about what was going on, really. I mean, at the point, and I just finished reading something from the Williamsburg magazine about General Washington. And the fact is, when this country was at the War of Independence with Britain, we didn't have anything. We didn't have a Navy. We didn't have a Treasury. We didn't have an organized government. We had nothing. And that's where we started from. And you look at where they were then and how far we've come and maybe uncome.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a process. To me, it's amazing. All the lives that were involved in this.
You said we had nothing. If you consider some of the politicians that nothing's changed. Now,
true.
Judy, you were going to say something that I want to ask you about history out on the hill.
But don't you think it has to come to the point where, rather than, as you say, learning the dates, the battles, etc., it has to get beyond that to the people and their involvement in life at that time, which was pretty tough on its own, let alone add a war to it.
Yes.
And there is where it becomes alive, I should imagine.
Right, and that is a lovely segue, as they say, to one of the things that we do through the Elkhart Historical Society. And yes, my name comes up a lot, but we have a board, we have people that are involved.
Yeah, it just isn't Gillette.
It isn't Gillette.
You got a bunch of fine people down there helping out.
Absolutely.
But I'd like to digress just a minute. You mentioned Dr. S.W. I had the pleasure of knowing your grandfather.
Yes, you did.
And I told you how old I am.
And you, I might.
But fine gentlemen, you have a lot of history in your family. Let's go to it. I think he was Presbyterian St. Luke's head of medical staff. Am I correct in that?
Yes, he was.
You see, there's a lot of history down here. and retired and came back down to Elkhart and lived in Crowhurst.
Yes,
which
he
is what
did.
we called that those days.
Yes.
Now it's Bob
We s-
Neal's Money Pit number 2.
We still call it the Crowhurst House. I don't think it can ever divest itself of that name. That's just what it is.
Well, sure it was. Now, and just let's establish your lineage on the hill because it's very significant. So you go back to.
Okay, you want the tree.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't care whether you're Pocahontas or not. That doesn't make. I'm not interested in that.
Well, one of the things that Dr. MacArthur did during the Depression was write the entire genealogy for the family, which is a published book about an inch thick and goes back all the way to Charlemagne. And I'm presuming you don't want to go that far this morning.
No,
because
we're going to quit 45 minutes here.
At any rate, picking it up from the Elkhart area, John Gillette, who married Lamira Park, were the beginnings of the group that settled in the Elkhart area. John Gillette and Lamira had 11 children, 8 of whom survived to adulthood. And the eldest was Emma, who first married Hiram Keyes, who died in a horse farming accident, one of those things that, of course, happened often enough. She then eventually married Governor Oglesby. So from that union came Lisa Pasquazi's family line. It went from Emma and Hiram Keyes down through Elizabeth Drake and then to Susan and
Well, it's just there's so much history up on that hill.
oh yeah
It's just the whole hill just steeped in history.
Right.
So now we are 2018, and I think those old folks would appreciate what we're doing down here in Elkhart. I call it the Elkhart Hysterical Society.
Right. And we do get that way sometimes. At any rate, fast forward the children that survived. There was only one son who survived to adulthood, John Park Gillette. He married but never had children. All the rest were girls, 7 girls. And quite a few of the girls never married. Nina never married. Jessie, who owns the Crowhurst farm that I am and Bob Neal share the driveway of, and Amy. And they all had very specific lives. Amy spent her life in Washington, D.C., and in fact, the Armenian embassy is Amy Gillette's home, was her home at one point. Nina lived most of her life outside of Paris, France, came home and is buried in Elkhart. Jessie spent all of her life in Elkhart, had interesting suitors like George Pullman and perhaps Cyrus McCormick. I know, there are an awful lot
all
of
intertwined.
interesting stuff. Mary Catherine married Edgar Hill, who was not only governor of the Philippine Islands in 1901, helped to start the sanitation and educational systems for the Philippines, but was 3 times mayor of Lincoln, Illinois. Who knew? I mean, just all kinds of...
And you're busy down there in the Elkhart Historical Society. Didn't do that again. I didn't do that on purpose. And it's good that you have people who are interested in kind of keeping that going. And now today, here in 2018, we have a series of ongoing programs down through the several years that have been going on. And we're coming up here very quickly to a very interesting one, an important one. So let's talk about Brian Fox and what he's going to do for you down there.
Well, Brian came bouncing in our shop, probably 2 months ago, and said, "Have I got a presentation for you?" And I had never met the man, so it was a rather astounding first encounter. But he is such an energized and interesting fellow, and he is going to present the two faces of history. Those two faces being Ninian Edwards, for whom Edwards Trace was named, and Potawatomi Chief Gomo, who have different sides of the same story.
Who was not related to Elizabeth Warren.
I don't think so. And so what Brian is going to do is actually reenact each one and do each one of their conversations one at a time, with a small costume break in the middle. Some of these things I am still, not totally enlightened on. Hope to be enlightened before November 2nd, when it is going to occur.
Yeah, now let's talk about the venue, and we all know how well we can get fed here. So, and reservations, maybe they're filling up now, Gillette.
They are beginning to fill up. We do still have room. If anybody is interested in coming, they should certainly call 217-947-2238 and make reservations. Go to the Elkhart Historical Society.org website and download the form. Make their menu choices, and once they are confirmed, send in their check right away.
Well, we one thing we can be assured of, we'll be well fed.
Oh, yes.
It's always very, very, very good and nicely presented, and it's kind of a little familial setting, because it's a family type setting, and the programs down there, they're very good, and see a lot of familiar faces. Same week after program, we see some of those that always show up,
Yes.
and which is fun.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, did this fellow, Brian Fox, did he entertain on the riverboat, plies up and down the Spirit of Peoria or whatever, the paddle wheel? Has he done that, I believe?
You may know more about it than I do, and I know that he also has put this particular program and others like it into the different school systems throughout the area. This one, of course, is pertinent for those who don't know anything about Edwards Trace. I should perhaps mention that.
Yeah, let's just talk about that just a jiffy here.
Edwards Trace, which, as we mentioned, was named for Governor Ninian Edwards, was actually originally probably a game trail, then the Indians followed that same pathway, which led
exactly
from Cahokia to Fort Clark, which is now Peoria. And back in the day, in order to squash what they felt was an uprising, Ninian Edwards took troops up what then was named for him, afterwards was named for him, to quell the rebellion. Well, in actuality, what he quelled was a village of elderly Indians and women and children, because the Braves happened to be up at the Fort Dearborn conflict that was going on, and the Potawatomi chief, Black Partridge, who has been actually raised to some sort of hero status, was the man that saved Margaret Helm from being killed at the Fort Dearborn Massacre, he was actually on the side of the white people and had been one of the Indians or Native Americans that had done as much as he could to have this transgression of or intermixing of pioneer and Native Americans turn out the right way. And it was his village that was massacred by Ninian Edwards. And so it's kind of, unfortunately, a little bit of a black mark.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness, history is
More than
replete
a
with
little.
black marks. We have lots of black marks as far as our relationship with the Indians.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes,
we're not
we do.
always the good guys in the white hats.
Oh, no.
Hardly really white in that regard. Back in those
Exactly.
days, there were a lot of things that took place that were just accepted for granted, but that's the history of the Edwards trace,
Right.
coming from
Right.
Cahokia up to Peoria.
And then there were different branches that went on beyond that. And there was a branch that went up to Galena, and that it established this tremendous trade network. The lead from Galena went all the way to Cahokia, clamshells and things like that came up the river. You know, it was a massive trade route. And then, of course, the pioneers hopped right on.
You know, the entire countryside in that era was filled with game trails. No, it didn't have GPS then, Judy.
No.
But
And
you stop to think about that. Nature created those trails because that's the way nature's creatures wandered.
And
so those
if-
became roads, ultimately.
Also,
In many cases.
what people may know is the area around Elkhart Hill actually was pretty marshy. And so people always wonder, well, why in the world would you take a trail over a heavily wooded hill? I mean, that would be rough going. Well, it may have been the only dry going, or comparatively dry going. Get them out of the
Muck.
boggy stuff and up on higher ground.
We're going to take the higher ground here in just a minute. We're going to honor some sponsors. And that's what we have to do each Wednesday morning. We're happy to do that. Go ahead, Mr. Ash. And having honored our sponsors, and we're happy to do that, we're right back live in the studios here, WLCN. Program, of course, each Wednesday morning is Viewpoint, hosted by the lovely and talented Judy Busby and an older fellow in town. Our guest this morning is Gillette Ransom. Gillette came to town many years back because her history is steeped in Elkhart Hill, and her mother and father lived there, her grandparents lived there. So this young lady, she knows something about Elkhart Hill, other than finding down where the local tavern is. So
She knows that too.
and she knows that too, by the way. But we're happy to have Gillette Ransom come up today. We have a place called the Wild Hare down there in Springfield. In Elkhart, and we have a lot of Springfield people come up here. By the way, I see them on a regular basis. Friends of mine that I've known for years, and we periodically have programs down there. And the food is great. The programs are fun, and we're here to talk about this November the 12th.
Second.
Thank
November
you. I had
2nd.
10 days off again.
Friday.
And,
Friday.
That's all righty. And it's going to have an interesting program. We'd like to have you come down there. Joetta's going to give you the number again to call to get your reservations in, and it's necessary. And by the way, a check too. But give us the number again, please, Joette.
Okay, it's 217-947-2238. Leave your name, the number in your party, and obviously the date of the event that you want to attend, and we will call you back, presuming that you call in enough time that there are still seats available.
So we're going to explore the different views of Illinois bicentennials, the performance of the two faces of Illinois history. The two faces are going to be comprised of one man doing two faces.
Correct.
Mr. Brian Fox, who's a storyteller of note around here.
Brian Fox Ellis.
Yes, that's correct. Well, once in a while we make a mistake.
that wasn't a mistake.
Oh, no,
not
not you.
often.
Perish the thought.
Surely not.
How old were you when you married Jimmy and came to Elkhart, Gillette?
Let's see.
Day or two.
I think probably around 38 or 39 years old.
By the way, just a serious note. Gillette's late husband was an artist of note and a fine gentleman. I was honored to have him as a friend. And so I got to stick around to some of these places in the small communities around here that I've known a long time. And I don't think you have any of the radio hosts that go back as far as I do. So
That's probably true.
That's right.
go ahead, Judy.
You didn't live then in Elkhart always.
Oh, no. As a child, I lived in Glenview, Illinois, went to Glenbrook North High School.
It's rah-rah.
And after doing some college, moved to Springfield, lived in Elkhart, then Springfield, then St. Louis, met James in St. Louis, and we finally decided we had to come back to Elkhart, which is where I always wanted to be.
Worked out just
And
fine.
it worked out.
Well, you're a blessing to Elkhart and to us here in the big city of Lincoln, America, too.
Well, all these little communities have to have a few people that kind of roll the beads a little bit.
That's right.
And rattle the cage so that they know. And we are blessed here in Lincoln to have some great smaller communities that surround us.
Yes. Now, you...
Even Burtonview.
Even Burtonview, yes. Were you interested in the history of Elkhart before you came back?
Well, I think what was funny is my mom always kind of tried to downplay everything. And it wasn't until I started getting into Judge Stringer's book and reading some of the things, I thought, Mom, great-great-grandfather knew Abraham Lincoln. They were friends. They did things together. I think she was trying to remain humble, and she thought
That was her.
admitting that Abraham Lincoln was great-great-grandfather's attorney kind of, sounded haughty or something like that. But in fact, that's exactly how that whole thing started.
She didn't want to be thought a braggart.
Probably not.
And if you knew her, you knew that
It
was
is a
the way
noble
she was.
thing, except it's too bad that you weren't introduced to this whole history business early on.
Well, afterwards, I discovered all sorts of things. My own great-grandmother married Dr. William Barnes of Decatur, she being the youngest of the 7 Gillette daughters. And he was a pretty amazing man in his own right, besides being a very good surgeon and doctor and co-founder of Decatur Memorial Hospital, what it is now, known as. He collected butterflies and moths, and at one point had the single largest collection of North American Lepidoptera that had ever been collected.
Would you
He
spell
bought
that?
other people's collections as well,
Okay.
and just kept amassing this great collection. Built a special bug house in Decatur that had a double wall system so he could control the humidity and the heat.
No kidding.
And preserve these. And in 1935, when he died, Charlotte, my great-grandmother, was approached by the National Museum in Washington. Mind you, this is during the Depression. We weren't over
We
dealing.
weren't rolling in the money, were we?
Right, and they came and bought the entire collection and moved it back to Washington to what is now the Smithsonian.
Isn't that amazing? Kind of puts a little bit of perspective on the word bug house.
So, I mean, the entire family had, went in different directions and did different things. Jessie, my great aunt, who never married, left her farm to Charlotte, who had children, those children being my grandmother and obviously then my mom and so forth, which is how we ended up being connected with Elkhart.
We're lucky to have, you see, here's a small community, small village with history. It goes back forever. Mm-hmm. And there are not many of them, every village has a history or two, but this happens to be unique, Elkhart Hill being what it is geographically.
Oh, yes. Being a glacial moraine. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people think, well, it's just about the Gillette family, and it is so absolutely not. We have featured Adam Henry Bogardus in his very own calendar. We publish a historical calendar every year, and we are up to year number, I think it's 31 coming up, which is 31 years of calendars. Oh boy. That's amazing to me. Talking about age going by.
That's why things work in Elkhart, is because you and others like you stick to it. I mean, 31 years, that's just not a weekend,
Well, Judy, I'm going to pose a question to you. Do you know who Captain Adam Bogardus was?
I know he was a sharp shooter.
There you go. That's good enough for me. She gets the blue ribbon.
Yes.
Yes, he was a world champion wing shot, and he also toured with Buffalo Bill Circus and so forth.
Actually was a partner with Buffalo Bill.
Was that a fact? Yeah.
For a while.
Uh-huh.
And unfortunately, that being in that business at that particular time of year, in those years, transportation and weather raised havoc with the shows. Captain Bogardus lost all of his equipment when the steamship that was carrying them to New Orleans sank, and just terrible things like that. And when you consider all the the prize-winning guns and what have you else.
Transportation reminds me of I don't want to digress at all from the subject matter, but the other day I saw a PBS on the circuses, and it was very interesting, and the mechanics and the logistics of going from Bloomington to Springfield, even a short 60-mile difference. The wagons, they had hundreds of elephants, not 50 or so, right. Hundreds of elephants, and menageries. It was quite an interesting program. Anyway, we digress, and let's get back to Captain Bogardus.
Now, he wasn't from around here, though.
He came from Bern, New York, originally, and came to the area. I believe he first lived in Petersburg.
Oh.
But his support system for his family was market hunting, and that because he was an excellent shot, he was able to support his family by going out on these long hunts with dogs that would fetch the game that he shot. And this was long before anybody in this area would hunt with dogs. They'd never heard of that.
You used the word market hunting. Now think of that in terms of relationship of the way that they could preserve and foods and meat and so forth. He's out in the field with his game and he shot. So he's got to get them in there pretty quickly. We don't have refrigeration.
No.
Think of that. Yeah.
So they did, and I think the time of the year that he chose to hunt changed as he moved into the Elkhart area, and where for a while he was pretty indiscriminate in his choices of when to hunt. He realized that he was killing next year's crop if he hunted at the wrong time of the year. And so he actually was a great conservationist. He helped to invent the trap chute. He had glass balls that were filled on occasion with feathers that would be flung into the air for people to shoot at rather than using live birds.
Live game.
Because the competitions would require at least 500 birds for a single competition. That's a lot of carnage.
Oh my.
Just for sport. And so that, I mean, there were a lot of pluses that
But nobody
came
thought
from
about
this.
that in those days. It was plentiful. Game was plentiful. So what? You know.
That's what happened to the passenger pigeon. They used to come in droves that would almost blacken the sky. And in a matter of not that many years, they were completely eliminated.
Did people think he was barmy for worrying about the population of the birds and the fowl and the fair?
Probably originally, but one of the most interesting books, this is another book that, why would a woman that is a non-hunter ever pick up a book like this to read, was the Field and Stream book that Captain Bogardus wrote about hunting and about his dogs and about his guns and about what became his philosophy as far as hunting. It's a fascinating book, which I think has plenty of application today.
Now, did he have special kinds of hunting dogs?
Yes.
Or that were bred strictly for, or just smart dogs?
No, these were actually hunting dogs. And I think he crossed retrievers with pointers. And each dog had its own attributes. One had a longer hair that allowed it to swim out without getting chilled if it was bringing ducks in. The other had a shorter coat, and so it was better in the brush where there's thorns and burrs and things. Because if you get your dog all stuck together with burrs going through that, the dog will worry itself the whole hunting trip trying to get all the burrs from places that aren't comfortable for a dog and between, its pads on its feet. And so his crossbred dog had the best of both breeds. It's a fascinating book.
Well, he was just into everything, wasn't he?
Yes.
He must have been an amazing man.
I think so. And his competitions at Madison Square Garden, which were no longer using live targets, were singularly amazing. How anybody could withstand shooting, I can't even remember the statistics, but it melted the lead in his gun
Bullets?
because of the friction of shooting again and again and again and again for hours. And it's just
He's a boy from
he is
Elkhart
amazing.
Hill.
Yes.
A lot of history there.
Oh gosh, amazing.
Now, I want to emphasize this availability for reservations down here at the Wild Hare. Once again, just to make sure everybody understands, they're going to have a recreation of a dramatic debate between our territorial governor, Indian Edwards, and a Potawatomi chief, Gomo, not related to Elizabeth Warren. And that's going to be on November the 2nd at the Wild Hare. And they're going to open up the doors at 5 p.m., dinner. They're going to have, as always, Peter and his crew managed to put together a pretty good little dinner.
Right, and the dinner was actually a special request from Brian Ellis to mimic the kind of pioneer food. So they are, if I can pronounce it right, pasties. They're folded meat pies.
Pasty?
Pasty.
You know, when we lived in Hibbing, was mining
Yes.
up there, you know.
They had
And
Cornish pies like that.
They had pasty dinners, you know,
Yes.
like lutefisk dinners. They had pasties. Isn't that interesting?
Yes, and that is what he requested, and I talked to Andrea and Peter about producing this, which is you know, it's not something they've offered before. And they were willing to do that, and some squash and that type of thing. By the way, the reservation cutoff for this event is October 26th.
That is pretty quickly around the corner here.
Yes, it is.
So we want to be sure, and I had that number right here in front of me. Oh, 947-2238.
Correct.
And you will get probably an electronic answer, and that's okay. Don't hang up. Go ahead and give them your information.
Yes. We take it off in the order it's received, so don't hang up. Leave your information.
Well, it's a great way to learn about a lot of history in our. Here it is, right in our own backyard, and probably of all the communities we have surrounding us, Judith K., probably Elkhart has the most history because it's kind of on the direct route. I don't know. Mount Pulaski has a great deal of history.
I would say every town that goes back that many years has that much history. It's whether anybody wrote it down. We all have that many generations. We all have a lot of fascinating history behind us. But you have to, number one, care about it.
Yes.
Number two, write it down, collect it.
Well, we think that the times that we're living in are kind of nothing, you know, so we wouldn't think about writing it down. But now look, as you look back at your family, my word, you've got a lot of fascinating people.
Yep, we do. But so do you.
Yeah, I got to check out
I could
those
tell you a lot about her
Morskies.
fascinating background. Family show we won't. That they're going to talk about the Illinois Territorial Governor and Mr. Edwards, Ninian Edwards, and they speaking about the War of 1812. History's going to come alive.
Yes.
And talk about the creative of our Constitution, and he changes characters down through as he goes from one character to the other. Pretty interesting fellow. I've seen him before. I can't remember where. I think right down there. I believe he's been at the Wild Hare, I believe.
Well, if he has,
Somewhere I saw him.
I missed him. I don't think that he has done anything that I've been associated with
Well,
before.
then once again, I'm in error. I find that difficult to believe, don't you, Jim?
It's his forte, history.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And you can tell by which the radio audience can't see the pictures that are on the flip side of your thing, but there are the two faces right there.
And
Now, he claims to be Cherokee in part. He and Elizabeth Warren.
no, he's a great deal more Cherokee than she is. You're more Indian than she is, for goodness sake.
That's much.
But wanting to hold our license, we're not going to go at that department.
But at any
I'm
rate,
tempted to go there.
That, of course, explains his interest in this part of history, too.
And Edwards Trace, as I started to mention, comes right across Elkhart Hill. Where the dinner is no more than a half a mile off of the main chunk of Edwards Trace that went across the west face of Elkhart Hill.
And those paths, as it were formed by the animals choosing, in the way back when, choosing a route to get from point A to point B.
Like migratory
and you talk
routes.
about the mire around Elkhart Hill. See, they'd have had to ford that a long time before your people got there.
Well,
So-
Captain Bogardus, I don't know how much time we have.
Go ahead.
Captain Bogardus did a lot of hunting for waterfowl. At one time, Lake Fork, which now is just farm ground, it was named Lake Fork because, in fact, it was a lake. It was a lake 14 miles wide, long, 3 miles wide, and about 24 inches deep, better known as a wetland, which eventually was drained to turn into farm ground. But at
Right.
one point, it was a wetland that would have attracted ducks and geese that Captain Bogardus, I am sure, used as a hunting area.
Which reminds me of the history of the Scully Prairie area. Old Mr. Scully coming through here and buying that ground the way he did, and then having the foresight and the
drain
money to drain it. Because that was all swamp ground.
Yes.
Not all swamp ground, but the significant
Well-
part of it was swamp ground.
John Gillette got into raising cattle for the same reason, because he felt the ground surrounding Elkhart was too marshy to raise crops. So he started raising prime cattle
Right.
and hogs. And eventually, he too drained, tiled and drained, as everybody does now. But, I mean, there's a lot of history in that, too.
Well, we've talked about the advantage and the fun. I could add that word too, fun, of living in the smaller communities. And I took around a little time and I looked around, found a quote here by none other than a fellow by the name of Caesar, Julius. Julius Caesar. You remember him?
Yeah, I knew the family.
Yeah.
Well, this is, I thought this was rather prophetic. He said, I'd rather be first in a village than second at Rome.
Ooh.
Thank you, Gillette Ransom, for being with us this morning. We appreciate you
My
very
pleasure.
much.
Thank
you,
you.
dear.